this off the screen so you can see this. All righty. Welcome to episode 12 of the Retro Ballroom Podcast live. And before we even get started, Paul has a little bit of a rehash from last week.
Morning, everybody. Just a follow-up from last week. We had Christina Deal on, and she had written a book that was coming out yesterday.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Money Girl.
Okay. Is it out? Did you check?
It is out,
Okay.
and I bought my copy this morning.
Oh, you did?
I did. Yeah. So
all right, you're like the first. You
I
probably are the first.
I don't
buyer.
know.
I don't know. But her video did get a lot of views. I think she was up to like 114. And also when I went around to trivia this week in a Big Dog, the one guy that works there, he apparently watched it and knows her, and I let her know that this guy's there. Like, she didn't know he worked there, and so she's probably going to come and play trivia there because they used to work together years ago at Annie Bailey's, I guess.
Right.
But so it's amazing how famous you can get when you're on the spot.
I'm looking forward to reading the book.
And
it sounds like a lot of good information.
Yeah. It never hurts to figure out how to have a little more money. Yeah,
make yourself more independent.
Yeah, passive income stuff.
Yeah. So.
Okay. All right. Well, our guest this morning, a gentleman that I've really only known for really very good for a couple weeks, as is most of the case with our guests. We don't twist people's arms and we don't beg people to come on this show. And every guest that's been on here, I probably have known for less than a year. It's not like I'm bringing family members and old cousins on here. But we got David Hain today, and he is an author. He wrote some books, and he's really his mission in life and his job is he is an addiction counselor, traveled all over the world. And I'm going to let him tell about himself because he knows better than me. And we actually met at trivia. Actually, a lot of my guests are people that I've met at my trivia, got to know. And the reason the initial connection with me and David, even though he was down at Willis Street at Wacker, he knew where Shennick was. And so we got to chit-chatting, and then him and his wife won 2 weeks ago. Yeah. So I had to take their picture, and through talking about that, he gave me his card, and he asked if he could be on here before he leaves for South Africa next week, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you tell your story, and we'll just ask questions, but you can start with where you're from or whatever you want to talk about.
Born and raised in Laureldale, so I'm a Reading guy. Graduate of Muhlenberg High School.
Mules.
The class of '69.
All right.
And haven't lived back there very much in my life, and have traveled around the world for the last 25 plus years, working in addiction in a variety of settings. I started with my first book, which is called From Addict to Disciple, and that really became the name of the work that we do and the business that I have. It's From Addict to Disciple. You can find it's at from A, the number 2 D, and then anything else. Our website's FromA2D.org. I'm at David from A to D on WhatsApp and Instagram and all over the place. So we, in our addiction work, and this really ties into the trivia piece, we've traveled around the world and lived in different places around the world, and got into trivia when we were living in a very small town called Widnes in England, which is near Manchester and Liverpool.
Okay.
And pub trivia was very popular there.
I will say that it's funny you brought that up, but like when I come up with my questions, I do use the internet. I don't sit here and dream these things up. But most of the trivia sites that I go to steal questions and arrange them how I feel will work best, most of those sites are English sites.
Yeah,
not US. It apparently is a big deal over there.
It's very
bigger
huge.
Than here.
Yeah, almost all the pubs. As I said, we were in a small town, but almost all the pubs will have trivia at least one night a week. And the pubs there are sort of family diners and bars,
right.
Mixed together.
Yeah.
And so that's where my wife and I got sort of interested in trivia by living there. We lived there for about 5 months, I think.
Okay.
And, just enjoyed it. And as we came back to the States from there, followed trivia here and there wherever we could.
Weird how the world works.
Yeah.
Is trivia harder over there than it is here? Because this trivia is kind of tough.
As an American, it's harder because so much of it is
the
tied
history.
into English history
Or English
or
TV.
their football league, their
Oh,
soccer
yeah,
league.
yeah.
So they have all these questions
Yeah.
from the Premier League in England that
Right.
you just
Which
sort of
I-
look,
I being here in America, and not that I'm anti-soccer, but I never watched soccer growing up. But we
Yeah.
didn't even have soccer at Calico when I went to school there, so I never got interested in it, and therefore, like I feel I wrongly assume probably that nobody's interested in it, so I avoid soccer questions.
Right. Yeah, I didn't grow up playing soccer either. My only exposure to soccer was at age 10 when I went to a summer camp up in the Poconos for a month, and they played soccer up there. And so I played for a month and then never again until my sons got interested in soccer.
Mhm.
And so then I even ended up like going and getting trained to be a coach and
Yeah.
did the dad thing.
Yeah. I did that.
to get
I did that
involved.
with wrestling and but okay, well England apparently is a big trivia thing.
Yeah.
It's
And that was a cool place to live because I'm also a musician. I play bass guitar and have played in bands most of my life.
wow, that I didn't even.
Playing blues and rock and roll.
Yeah.
And the funny story from Widnes, while we were living there, very early on, I liked public transportation, and so it fit there. So I went down to the local train station to go from Widnes to Liverpool, sat down on a bench waiting for the train, and just sort of looking around. I'm a people watcher, and I realized there was a plaque behind me. And so I turned around and looked at the plaque, and it said, on this bench on such and such a day, Paul Simon sat here and wrote Homeward Bound.
Oh, wow.
So there's a trivia question for you.
Yeah. Actually, I probably won't use the same questions anyway, but last night there was a trivia question about Strawberry Field.
Oh, yeah.
And what kind of, it was John Lennon hung out there a lot as a child.
Mhm.
What kind of establishment was it?
Okay.
And it was an orphanage.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if
Okay.
you saw that when you were over there.
No, no, we got into the Yellow Submarine stuff and into the cavern, I think it was called, which was
where the
place
Beatles
they
first
really sort of
started basically. Yeah. That's
Nice.
So you lived in England and you were over there as part of your work, or you just?
We were actually over there as missionaries at that
okay.
time. We were part of a group called Adventures in Missions, which is based out of Gainesville, Georgia. And we were over there as missionaries and had a team with us of university students. And just there for, like I say, about 4 or 5 months.
All right.
Doing work there.
Yeah. Now, when you travel around, like you show up in a country to do mission work, like how does that work? Do you like who do you get a hold of in that country to like get the okay to do it?
Yeah. Well, we're not missionaries anymore officially.
Okay.
But we did it originally when my wife and I got married. We ended up going to North Philly, and we thought we were going to go as missionaries and start like a sidewalk Sunday school.
Oh, okay, all right.
And that didn't work out.
Nobody wanted to hear it.
Unbeknownst to us, we were living in North Philly, and within 5 blocks was the heart of the heroin area for North Philly, sort of at the corner of Germantown and Allegheny Avenues. And as I would be out and about, I'm seeing all these heroin addicts. And at that time, it was guys who had gotten hooked in Vietnam and come back, and with sort of the history of the unwelcome return for many of the guys, and having been hooked over there, they just sort of ended up continuing, or trading maybe a morphine addiction for heroin over here. And so they were middle-aged guys living in abandoned homes across from a graveyard, totally gutted homes,
Right.
and doing 10, 12 bags of heroin a day. And that was sort of my area that I cut my teeth on,
Okay.
on what's become what I've been doing for 25 years since. So we started there in North Philly and ended up moving into Kensington and worked the streets of Kensington for
which
a number
I
of
only
years.
know from the internet, but is not a place you'd want to be walking around at night, probably.
Yeah, it's a place I did walk around at night.
Well, more power to
But
you, I guess.
it was an interesting, and still is an interesting neighborhood at any given time. Back then in the 90s, late 90s, there would be 200 or 300 heroin addicts that you could see either just laying out on the stoops or on the pavement or in abandoned homes, anytime, day or night.
Now, and sticking to that area in your beginning there, how receptive were these people to you? Like I imagine they don't want to be addicts in most cases. I mean, but
Yeah.
but they can also probably be a little testy, I would guess,
Yeah, like what would be the strategy of
approaching them. Yeah.
And yeah, because that
Yeah, and
there's obviously the dangerous part of it.
I did all the wrong things first.
Okay.
So I won't list all the wrong things, but we've all probably done them.
Yeah,
And I think that the key in the wrong thing is trying to fix someone
Yeah.
and treat someone as your project,
Okay, not as a friend,
not as a person.
yeah.
And so very early on, we went out and would be focusing on their heart, trying to get to know them as a friend. So even though in the beginning I was a missionary, I wasn't handing out tracts or Bibles or things. I'd actually hand out candy bars that I got from an M&M Mars
Okay, yeah.
factory over across the bridge in Jersey. We'd make fried egg sandwiches. We had a local Souter egg in New Holland
Oh,
there.
okay,
Would send us 45 dozen eggs
okay,
every week, and
Yeah.
we'd grill them up and make egg sandwiches and hand them out.
okay.
And so it was just getting to know the people and really being able to not be different, not be the answer guy, not be the fixer,
Right.
but to be
And to get them to trust you to some degree.
to be one of them.
Yeah.
So it's sort of the difference between towering over someone who's almost passed out on the pavement and sitting down next to them and offer them a candy bar and just let friendship and relationship develop. So I'd be out on the streets 40, 60 hours a week, day and night, all kinds of weather. And really, and that led to the writing of my second book, which is called The Heart of an Addict, because the approach that I realized over time was, even though we use the 12 steps and follow the 12 steps in our program, that the key was not the sort of mainstream teaching people about drugs, teaching people the harms, trying to shake them and say, don't you know you're killing yourself?
Right.
But to get at the heart wound. And what I found over the years, and I've worked with over 30,000 addicts now over these years.
That's
amazing.
amazing.
That I haven't met one yet that didn't have a heart wound.
Okay.
That they were medicated.
Okay.
And so the focus of what we do is really to get into that heart wound and get that processed and bring healing there so that they can see this is my drug of choice, because it literally was medicating my pain that I couldn't even name.
Right.
And providing a fantasy for me, providing an escape and numbing everything that's going on, So that's really what we focus in on.
Yeah, that opens up a lot of doors right there.
Well,
wow,
I told him you were a
yeah.
police officer and a student resource.
Yeah.
So, you probably have run into addicts.
All the time. Yeah, all the time. And repeat customers, as
Yes.
we would say, as in our world. We didn't see them so much in school. Those
Mhm.
kids weren't getting high on heroin,
Right.
but their parents were.
Yes.
So you could see the fallout from that.
Yeah.
And that's what we, when I was in school, that's what we tried to help, was the fallout. On the road before school, yeah, as you know, the heroin epidemic went crazy here in the last 8 years,
Hmm.
and it just went over the top. And then throw fentanyl in there, um, and then Narcan now,
Yeah.
which there's a whole bunch of different thought processes on that. It definitely, I've seen it, used it, it works. I mean, it absolutely
Yes, it
turns
does.
somebody around like they're dead, and you give them Narcan, and then enough comes into their system, they sit up and look at you and like, ooh,
Yeah.
what are you doing here? It's really strange how quickly that counteracts the effects. But there was times that we would Narcan somebody twice in one shift.
Hmm.
Like, they weren't going to the hospital. I'm fine. Why are you even here? Leave me alone.
Yeah.
And they would go out, and then they would get another hit, and then we would get another call. Whether it be because the Narcan only goes, it brings you back. That's great, but it doesn't. It's not long term.
Right.
And that whatever effects that the heroin, whatever drug you were doing in your system continues to do that, it was immediately stopped for that second, brought you back, but it could continue. So
Right.
you could walk away, walk down the street and fall over because the Narcan now has wore off.
Hmm.
And then we did the immediate fix
Yes.
and moved on to the next call because it's waiting.
Yeah.
There really was not an opportunity to do, what you're doing.
Yeah.
We worked with, as much as we could, some of the local organizations, City Gate,
Hmm.
places like that do outreach, and try to make that friendship and give connections. But
Yeah.
it's tough.
During my years in Philly, especially, got to know a lot of the police, got to know all the EMTs.
Yeah.
Got started in prison work also, because the guys that I'd be working with in the street would either end up, in the hospital or in prison
Mhm.
or whatever. But one of the interesting things around Narcan, and now this is back before fentanyl
Yep.
became popular or became cheaper than heroin, so
Yeah.
put in
Yeah.
in the mix without addicts even knowing it.
Yes.
There were guys that I would find passed out or just fallen face down in the dirt in a vacant lot.
Yeah.
And I'd be doing CPR or trying to rouse them
Mhm.
while waiting for an ambulance.
Yeah.
And these guys would be fighting. You could see the turmoil in them because they didn't want the Narcan.
Huh?
Because even though it would bring them right to,
Yeah.
it would block the high
Yeah.
from the heroin for
Absolutely.
up to 72 hours, depending on the person.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Yeah.
So,
So-
then in their mind, they're wasting their money.
Correct.
It-
Because
yeah.
they still had the physical
Yeah. Addiction.
craving and
Yeah.
addiction
Mhm.
and needed the heroin to keep from getting sick.
Yep.
And they wouldn't get the high out of it for
Yeah.
anywhere from 24 to 72 hours.
Mm.
So it was an
Yeah.
interesting learning experience for me,
yeah.
as
Yeah.
you saw that the first time, because guys would desperately be struggling to
Yeah.
come to as soon as they heard the
Oh,
sirens.
Yeah. Right.
And then the other funny side was, as the EMTs came, then they got to know me
Right.
because I was in the same area all the time. And I'd have EMTs that I'd get to know, and they'd go like, "Why don't you take up a hobby?
Yeah.
What are you doing out here?
What is your hobby?
Play softball or basketball, or like, what are you hanging out here for?"
Now, do you feel like you said in your when you were down in Philly, a lot of the addicts at that point in time were Vietnam vets who got hooked over there? Because I'm sure if you were in Vietnam, you wanted to look for something to numb your senses of what's going on in your life at that point. In today's world, do you feel more addicts are become addicts because of prescription opioids, or because they are just sitting around one night saying, "I'm going to try heroin"?
Yeah, it's a combination.
Okay.
And if we go back even to the 90s in Philly, there was a hospital off Roosevelt Boulevard that had a whole wing just for city employees who got injured on the job, got opioids in the hospital, and then when the doctors cut off their scripts, drugs were cheap in Kensington, so they'd go down Kensington Avenue, and then they'd get hooked on heroin. So they had a detox wing just for city employees.
Oh,
Okay. So there's a percentage that, yes, getting hooked that way exists. There's also a percentage that have been addicts, may or may not have ever tried opioids. And then now years later, they go in for surgery and the opioids introduced and it kicks in.
Oh, okay.
So that's a key factor. But I think the explosion today of the opioid epidemic is a combination of things. That one, it's hitting middle class, it's hitting the suburban kids. It's more obvious.
Yeah.
So, Ephrata was a hot spot for heroin more than 8 years.
Well,
Okay,
and I get that, and that was my argument always was.
Yeah.
Ephrata isn't any different than Manheim Township or East Hempfield or Lancaster City or
Reading.
Really, you're right, or Reading, right? We're no different. It's just that the powers that be in Ephrata decided that they were going to make a difference.
Yes.
And they made it public.
Mm-hmm.
I was part of the group, the mayor's group, in helping. What can we do for the heroin issue that we have here in Ephrata? And we made it public.
Yeah.
We got community members to come in and talk and say, well, this is what we could use, or what. And now other areas, oh well, we can't talk about it because then people won't buy houses here.
That's right.
Right. So Ephrata was all of a sudden known for, well, you have a heroin problem in Ephrata.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're any different numbers wise than anywhere else. And it's really hard to track because we were very good at tracking Narcan use in the police department.
Mm-hmm.
Other police departments were not tracking it quite so well for whatever reasons. I'm sure there was a multitude of reasons, all the way up to political, so there's no real numbers to show if there was more of an issue somewhere. But it's across the board. And what was interesting, and when I first started on the job, if there was a drug overdose of some kind, it generally was early 20s.
Yes.
And now that has changed. We've had them all the way up, 60s, 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
Overdosing on heroin. It was like your examples are right on. Like,
yes. And the oldest person that I worked with that was the oldest age when they started using heroin was a woman in Kensington who was 84.
84. Yeah.
And,
who was introduced by her daughter.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Who was, in her 50s or whatever, and a heroin addict.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see the dynamic now. And as I work with youth, and I work in schools, I work on the streets, I work in homeless shelters and rehabs and prisons and sort of all over. But as I work with youth, it's a combination of sort of the change that's taken place in these younger generations compared to when we grew up, and we're sort of in the same generation. And also the change from the dealers. Fentanyl is cheaper than opium by a long shot and more powerful than opium by a long shot.
Yeah. So
just the same way that a spice company is going to put flour in their spice mix because it's cheaper than the spices.
Right.
Yeah. And they save money on that percentage of flour that's in the shaker, so to speak. The dealers that are cutting the product have that same cost savings with putting in fentanyl.
Without having the correct knowledge of doing it without hurting somebody.
Correct.
Yeah.
And also, one of the key things that woke me up when I was down in Kensington was when someone would overdose and die, there was a significant percentage of the heroin addicts that would flood the streets trying to find out where did they buy,
Yes.
what logo was on the blue packet that
Mhm.
the person bought,
Yep.
because they wanted that stuff.
Yes.
Because there's that continual
Yeah.
desire to find the first high, which they can't.
Right.
But if the near-death experience can
Yes.
create a new first high, they're willing to take the risk.
Yep. That was interesting. And when I had heard that for the first time, like watch out, we put it out there, watch out, Pink Panther
Yeah,
is out there, okay? And it's loaded with fentanyl and it's gonna hurt. And they would go look for it.
correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
instead of you would think
You think it's
in,
like,
in our
dude,
mindset,
don't do that, that's
yeah,
bad.
if you see that,
No.
stay away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's part of that you had mentioned early on, they don't want to be addicts. There's that point in especially opioid addiction, but you could say the same thing with crystal meth, where you fall into this belief that I'm always going to be an addict. And whether you've heard the once an addict, always an addict from a counselor, whether you've heard from a judge or a police officer or a probation officer or parole officer, you're never going to change. Whether you've heard from parents, you're not my son anymore, you're not the boy we raised, be gone. There's this point where it settles in that, am I going to be one of the few who can get out of this or not?
Right.
And if I'm not, I might as well
Go all
be in
in.
control and go all in.
Yeah.
And, I've also talked to so many people who, and I don't want to say just the category of loners, but so many people as we work with the heart wounds who were the guys who didn't fit in, the girls who didn't fit in for whatever reason.
Right.
And whatever they didn't fit in, whether it was their family or at school or not popular enough or what have you, who will look me right in the eye and say, you know what, David? Being an addict is the first thing that I'm really great at.
Oh my.
I am a pro at being an addict. I found my niche.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Honed the skill.
when from the outside we can look in and say, but you're wasting your life. And they're going, no, I found my spot. I found my niche.
Yeah. No. And now do you, and you obviously talked about a lot of people do it because of a heart wound. Is there other people who probably, and I'm not relating this to getting hooked on prescription opioids, but do it as much for a heart wound as physical pain?
Yeah. Yeah. The opioids are highly, highly addictive.
And not even that they got their first doses from prescription medicine, but they were looking, maybe the 84-year-old whose daughter, maybe the 84-year-old had a lot of pain, because you have pain when you're old.
Sure.
And her daughter said, well, you know what? If you try this, you won't have that pain anymore.
Yeah.
And so they're, not looking to mask an emotional, but an actual physical pain.
Yeah. And what I found in that is there's still an emotional thing underneath. Okay. But the physical addiction is real. And the physical addiction for the average person who's never been an addict, the average person who their life looks perfect, two cats in the yard and all that sort of stuff. They still get to the point where now when they realize they're physically addicted, the guilt and shame comes on because they can't get that monkey off their back.
Yeah.
And, you have a Rolling Stones poster over there. It's sort of, the Rolling Stones Mother's Little Helper song I think about a lot. You get to that point where this is the thing that does not only kill their physical pain, but takes the edge off their emotions.
Okay.
And so it has that combination, but the physical pain is real.
Yeah.
And, that's interesting in this state with the medical marijuana debate now, with lots of states and lots of areas around the world have the safe use spots that you can go to.
Well, and I was going to
Simply because of that, where they're looking at decriminalizing as much as possible for those users who are desperately hooked.
and do you feel? I mean, in my mind, it would legalizing all drugs. Number one, it would save the government a heck of a lot of money. But besides that fact, would it be better to do that? And then the people who are addicts, whether they chose to be or they just inadvertently became one, could go somewhere and know they're not going to buy a bag of something that's going to kill them. Do you feel legalizing everything would be a better or worse solution than continually to fight a drug war? And it would put all the dealers out of business if you sold the stuff cheap enough.
Yeah, and I think for me, and I actually did one of my podcast episodes on that.
He actually has way more episodes of podcasts than we do.
My podcast is A2D, so the letter A, the number 2, the letter D, From Addict to Disciple. It's on all formats. It's audio. I try to keep them around 15 minutes just because of my attention span. So they're good for commutes. I think I'm up to episode 110.
Yeah, so.
I do. A new one drops every Monday. But I did one on decriminalizing and looked at different things around the world where they've tried it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm an advocate of that. If we look at the war on drugs, it goes back to Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon,
and it's a war you're never going to win.
It's a war that we're not going to win.
Well,
and
I disagree to a point. In my world, okay, if you did it, you had drugs on you, got arrested for whatever, okay, whether the drugs led to it or not. If the drugs were the cause of it, doesn't matter. And you were put in jail, and part of your punishment was counseling, to go through a rehab, whatever that. Yes, you could take a horse to a water, but you can't make them drink. I get that,
unless you salt their oats.
Well, that's a good point. It gives these people a reset that they won't get the drugs because they're in jail, and now they have an opportunity in front of them to make it better.
Right.
Now, whether they take advantage of that or not, is up to them. But it gives that opportunity, and I have, arrested people that went through that and came out and came to me later and is still doing well today. Heroin, big time heroin addict on robberies, and said, "Thank you for arresting me."
Yeah,
and that's not the norm. I get it, but I think it does have its place. Well, you're not going to arrest your way out of it.
Right.
You're not going to arrest your way out of it. That's for sure. That's
well, maybe part of the deal is, okay, you show up at the drugstore, the legal drugstore, but part of the deal is, okay, you come in and you want to buy your next hit. Maybe part of that is, all right, we'll sell that to you, but your part of the deal is you need to go through counseling.
Yeah.
Where instead of arresting somebody or making them go out in the middle of the night and buy some unknown bag of something, let them buy it legally, but at the same time, tie that into, all right, you've been in here like every day for a week.
Yeah.
You need to now go to get your next. You couldn't even really say to get your next hit, you need to do this, because then that would still allow for dealers to be on the street when somebody decided, okay, screw you, I'm going to
be as many.
But if you could eliminate the turf wars or whatever, and the money involved that's going to bad things, that people are spending money on that are going to bad things, why not let them get something relatively safe, comparably speaking, pay that money. And I sort of even hate to tie it to the government, but pay that money to an establishment that uses part of that money to set up drug treatment places.
Right. And the places that have the safe use facilities, the overdose prevention facilities, do have counseling and medical help there, as some correctional facilities do. I think the historic problem that we run into, and I work in prisons. I worked for 5 years in Lancaster County Prison, 20 hours a week. I still go into prisons, and I've got lots of success stories from prisons. Okay.
And I would totally agree with that. Yeah.
The problem is that the history of lock them up and throw away the key.
No, that doesn't work.
And so it's a shift that's taking place in some police departments, and as you say, in some communities like Ephrata, it's not happening everywhere.
No,
and it's a shift that not every prison wants changed.
Right.
And especially in the States now, when we're going through the shift, is the government still going to run the prisons? Or are they going to be private enterprise? We're trying some of each to see what works. For me, I'm in favor of getting whatever works. And part of my advocacy of decriminalizing is I've worked, in the prisons for a number of years. The people in prison are the minorities, coming from minority backgrounds, coming from poor backgrounds. The people, middle class, affluent, white, can get out with shorter sentences or no sentences historically. So the history in the States, especially, and many other countries, the drug legislation has kept the stigma off the streets. But it did nothing about, the doctors, the lawyers, the accountants, the businessmen, snorting cocaine. And did nothing about that. And so, I'm coming at it from a humane standpoint and saying, wherever it is, if we can get people into a position where counseling and treatment is available, where care is available, at any given time, there's around 10% or less of addicts in any kind of treatment worldwide. So that's a lot of people that can't get treatment. That's part of why I started my podcast. That's part of why I equip people wherever I can to be able to get out there, because we need to figure out how to salt their oats, so to speak, to get them to be ready.
And if it wasn't illegal, there was the point of, okay, well, then the drug dealers they're not making it anymore.
Right.
So it's to say safer. It probably would be.
It would be safer.
Well, we wouldn't have as many
crime.
So as much as I don't quite agree with making it legal, there is definitely some points there to make it legal. Like they're looking at marijuana, and you make that not legal, or either you can use it, and all of a sudden, the fentanyl goes away.
Yes.
And that is so dangerous that rolled through here. I can't go into details, but that rolled through this area within the last week. It put a couple people in the hospital, not because they're doing drugs, because they've touched something that somebody that was doing drugs, and it got into their system. And
fentanyl's not to be messed with.
That's scary.
That is. That happened twice last week. That's dangerous. So you got a good point that a lot of that would go away.
And I in my mind, I don't think that it would create any more addicts than there are now.
It wouldn't create more addicts. It might appear that way because you might have more people seeking treatment because the stigma's going away. You might have more people, being able to share what has been going on behind closed doors all these years. So and I don't use the term functional addict, because any addict has dysfunctional relationships. Okay, even if they're hiding it, whether it's porn or drugs or alcohol or whatever it is, there's dysfunction in their life. But there are so many functioning addicts. When I lived down in North Philly, one of the surprising things was seeing, and I won't mention the hospital, but seeing doctors and nurses stop by the abandoned homes to get their shot of heroin before they started their 12-hour shift.
Wow.
Well, and you say functioning addicts. At that point, if
Yeah.
they didn't get that hit on the way to work, they would be non-functional.
Correct. Non-functioning.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there's still dysfunction because here they are, you know, and I'm not saying doctors need to be different than other people, but here they are, you know, in a facility
Yeah.
saving people's lives, and you're hoping they got it all together.
Yeah, yeah.
But they're using the heroin to stay functioning, and they appear functioning to everybody else.
Yeah.
And it, you know, in the first responders community, it's the same way,
Mm.
where, you know, guys in police department and EMTs and things like that see so much trauma
Hmm.
day in and day out at a moment's notice, and you can't control what your
No.
next call is, so to
No.
speak, or how gruesome it's going to be.
Yep.
And there, you know, there's a significant percentage in the first responder community
Yeah.
that have something
Hmm.
to numb that pain, so they don't take it home and end up
Well,
divorced and
yeah,
I
all
mean,
that
it
stuff.
sort of goes back to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's same basic reason that they got hooked. I mean,
Yeah.
if Vietnam was fun, they probably wouldn't have needed to get hooked on something.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it was fun.
No, I'm pretty sure it wasn't fun. I'm very fortunate feeling that it ended before I got of age to potentially be drafted. But
So what is this? This is a different.
Okay. So this book is called From Ashes to Destiny. And I wrote this when it came time to rewrite these two. And what I did was put everything from these two books in this book and created a complete curriculum with worksheets and exercises that people have to go through, so they journal everything they're doing in their recovery. So this is a complete curriculum. It's being used in several countries around the world, in homeless shelters, in prisons, in schools, in rehabs. I run groups going through this. If anyone's interested, please contact me. I run groups online and in person. And there's actually two books of these. This one is the drug and alcohol addiction. And there's one exactly the same title in cyan, which is sort of a bluish green, and that's for sexual addictions. And the only difference is where this one, as you get to the worksheets, mentions drugs or alcohol and the behaviors around that. The other one mentions porn and sexual things and your behaviors around that. And I work equally in both, in and out of prison. There's several prisons that I only work with convicted rapists going through the one on sexual addictions.
Okay.
So,
and this may be a weird question, but throughout your career of doing this, were there times where your life, well, I'm sure it was in danger every time you walked, but was there any time where you really thought, all right, I'm done? You know, this, like, did anybody ever pull guns on you? Or
I was in the presence of guns and knives, not all the time. You know, I could cite a couple examples, but very often I know I'm in that situation where I think, what am I doing here? You know, even living in North Philly, we lived on Colorado Street near 17th and Lehigh, near the old Phillies ballpark.
okay,
When it was up in that part of town. And, you know, we didn't fit. We didn't fit, you know, and, you know, in the streets of Kensington, and, you know, walking down Kensington Avenue and walking into abandoned homes at midnight or 2 in the morning or any time of day or night.
now when you did this, you're on your own, you have other missionaries or whatever you refer to yourself.
Yeah.
You travel with somebody, or you go by yourself? Or even a better question, is your wife out there with you?
She was for a while, and she was in Lancaster County Prison working with the women for a while, but she was a raise our sons mom.
Okay, yeah.
And I've had various sidekicks come along and spend a 6-month or a year season going with me everywhere I go. I've trained a lot of people. I partner with people wherever I go. So for instance, in 2 Mondays from now, I fly back to South Africa, and I'll be going into a town called Krugersdorp, which is near Johannesburg. And I'm working very closely with a men's shelter there called Tower of Life. And I actually am taking them through this book twice a week through, they prefer Skype there because they have a better connection on Skype than
Okay.
Zoom. And I've been taking them through that. But when I go there, I live in the shelter with the guys.
Okay.
So the month of February, March, I spent 3 weeks straight, every 24/7 with the guys in the homeless shelter. When I land over there on the 25th of the month, I'll be going to the homeless shelter.
Well, and I guess that leads back to being one of them, as
Yeah.
opposed to being this outside person showing up for 5 hours a day trying to tell me what to do and what not to do.
Yeah. And I think that's the other side. You know, I said, I'm not there to be the expert, the fixer, the answer man, even though people want that. But I'm also not there as the tourist.
Mhm.
Either one can get you in trouble.
Okay.
You know, when I was down in Philly, a number of mission groups would come because we were with an agency then that sent high schoolers and university schoolers on a 1 week mission trip, and they'd want to get out and sort of touch an addict.
Oh.
And
Mm.
you know, I have had to say again and again, don't hand out money. Don't.
Yeah.
They'd still do it, or they'd want to take pictures,
Yeah.
and you know,
Yeah.
or they'd want to be hip and
Yeah.
start strutting and
Yeah.
show how cool they were. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah, you definitely don't fit in.
you know, I think part of the key is to realize, you know, and I'm sure you know this from your time in police work. You know, if you stop and stare, you're inviting yourself into the situation you're staring at,
Mhm.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you're actually paid to get invited
Yeah,
into that
exactly.
situation.
And sometimes that is the purpose.
You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
but a straight gawker walking down the street,
Yeah.
who just stops and stares because there's an argument or
Yeah.
there's a fist fight or there's someone selling drugs, you're inviting yourself into what's
Yeah.
happening there.
Yeah. Do you find when you go to all your other countries, is the drug problem as bad as it is here, or worse, or
It's pretty bad all over the world.
okay?
And you can see it from statistics. You can see it from prison statistics. You know, for a number of years, you know, always greater than 80% of the inmates were there for some addiction, some crime in the midst of addiction. The best countries were still admitting to sort of 60%. Okay. And so I think what makes it better or worse is what drugs are there right now.
Okay.
And that's only because I've been everywhere, so it's easier to see. So for instance, there's many countries fentanyl hasn't hit yet. So they don't have 80, 90,000 overdose deaths a year like the US does.
Right.
But the only reason why it's not there, it just hasn't shown up there.
Mm.
When
Yeah.
when it does, it's
And it will.
they'll
Yeah.
have the overdoses. But even without the overdoses, addiction is addiction is addiction, and it tears apart families, it tears apart dreams, it tears apart communities. It is destruction at its worst, so to speak. And so it is bad wherever it is and whatever the drug of choice is.
Okay. And when you go, obviously you're spiritually, your treatment is a spiritual based treatment. Would you consider it to be totally Christian based, or spiritual in the sense that you don't care what religion somebody is, you're trying to get to their heart?
Yeah.
So you're not necessarily selling Christianity, and I'm not anti-Christian, but
Right.
but depending where you go in the world, that may not relate to somebody. Well,
Yeah.
even in the U.S. So you're spiritually, it's the heart. It's not what you claim to be on your religion. If somebody asks you
Right.
that question,
Yeah, that's a good question. And if I go back 25 years, I was a missionary sent out by a church,
Right.
and part of a mission organization and all that. And so the Christian was showing up first, so to speak,
Right.
even though my purpose was not proselytizing. My purpose was not to get people to say the sinner's prayer and accept Jesus
Right.
Christ as their Lord and
Right.
Savior.
Right.
My purpose was to work in addiction. Over the years, I realized, and especially as I started working in prisons, um, Wiccan witches would show up, Satanists, atheists, Buddhists,
Right. Right.
Muslims, you name it,
Right.
anybody. And so I had to be able to say, look, the promise I can make is I'm not going to ask anyone to change their religion. I'm not going to make converts. I'm trying to get you from addict to disciple to disciple to whatever your higher power is.
Right.
The references in my books are from the Bible
Okay.
because that's what I am.
Yeah. Right.
But if you view it as philosophical teachings, it could be stuff from Gandhi, it could be stuff from the Quran, it could be stuff from anywhere.
Right.
And you need some core values to base your life on to be able to move forward so that you have a foundation that isn't always shifting. And so we come from that approach, and that's gotten me, invitations to go to Iraq, to go to countries that, obviously wouldn't
If you're
want a
going
Christian
right,
thing in there.
if your purpose is to sell Christianity, you're
Yeah.
not coming.
Yeah.
If you're coming here and you can be spiritual and not be Christian or Buddhist or any,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's religion and spirituality are two separate things.
Yeah. And I think a perfect example is just before COVID hit, I was over in Johannesburg and I was working in a prison there. I was doing one group going through the drug and alcohol curriculum for 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. And right after that group would end, I had a group going through the sexual addiction book, 2 hours for 5 days a week for 5 weeks straight. And the head of the prison came in sort of 3 weeks into the program to get the reaction from the guys because he was hearing tidbits from the guards. They call them warders over there of these guys are changing, and they're hearing the gossip. And probably the neatest comment that really warmed my heart, there was a guy who was a Muslim in the drug and alcohol book, and the warder looked at him, and his name's Suleiman. And he said, Suleiman, this is, there's Bible stuff in there. This guy's a Christian. What are you doing? He said, there's nothing offensive in here. He doesn't say anything that's offensive. And as a matter of fact, I've gotten so much good out of going through this curriculum. I would recommend for you as the head of prison that every Muslim that's in here should go through this course.
Oh, that's
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was like,
Yeah.
wow.
yeah. Yeah.
I-
Yeah. Now, when you go over there and you do this, how do you make a living?
Well,
Like donations? Do the prisons pay you? Do the countries pay you? Like,
yeah, and it's a combination of everything.
okay.
I'm semi-retired, so I guess
Okay. Well,
get some
yes.
income that
Yeah,
way.
well, I know what that feels like.
I do have two local businesses here. Interestingly enough, Amish
Oh, okay.
root businesses that support my trips overseas.
Okay.
I do have some income that comes in passively through book sales. When I work with people here in the States, I charge.
Okay. Yeah.
But again, if I'm working in a prison, I can't charge the inmate.
Right.
And if someone's homeless on the street in
What
their
are
addiction,
they
I
gonna pay you
can't.
with?
Where do you send the
Yeah,
invoice?
yeah.
So it's just a combination of factors. It'd be nice to say I've got this steady flow of income,
Right. Well, no,
but it's a combination of things.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's in. I
Yeah.
would hope you're being supported somehow.
Yes.
Because you're doing a heck of a job.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna. We got and we really don't have any particular time limit, but let's say we got 5 minutes left.
Okay.
I'm going to let you tell as much as you want about how you got involved in this.
Okay.
And you tell as much as you want.
Yeah. Well, I briefly said how it started down in North Philly.
Right.
And it really just sort of snowballed from there because, within 4 or 5 blocks of where we lived, there were 300 heroin addicts at any given time. And 300, I can say that number because I would get people's names. And I'm bad remembering names, so I had to write them down. And I would then dig in deeper because I realized, these people don't have IDs. They're not paying bills. They don't have addresses.
Right.
So as I befriended them, I got to the point where I'd say, will you share a contact with me in case something happens? In case you end up in jail, in case you end up in the hospital, in case you overdose, I'll contact them for you. And so people would share that. And so it that really started it. From there, I ended up joining part-time with a counseling agency that was on Germantown Avenue. That led me then to start to get credentialed in this.
Oh, okay.
And so I took all the courses I could.
So do you have a degree of some sort?
Yeah, I have my doctorate in
okay.
in Christian counseling. I also have an international certification as an advanced drug and alcohol counselor.
Oh, wow.
Which at the time I got it was the highest certification you could get. That actually opened up South Africa to us and many other countries, and led to when our family moved to South Africa to live full time in 2010. We went on a volunteer's visa, but because of my credentials and my experience, they offered us permanent certificate or permanent residence for the whole family, so I can come and go as I please anytime. I don't have dual citizenship, but I have residence there, which allows me in. So it really just grew that way, and I was just open as I worked with people to go wherever they ended up. So whether it was prisons, whether it was rehabs, whether it was their children still in school, whether it was into the police stations, whatever it might be, I would just sort of go. And everything just developed from there. So if we look back over the past 25 years, there may be years where 80% of what I did was in prisons, or another year where 90% of what I did was on the streets.
Okay.
Another year, like right now, when I go to South Africa, at least 2/3 of my time, I'm in a homeless shelter. That wasn't the same 5 years ago.
Right.
So just sort of going whatever doors open. And that's really, what led to doing the podcast too. COVID hit and I couldn't travel anymore.
Well, and when COVID hit, I was doing trivia out of my basement on Facebook Live it gave me something. There was no profit, but I did it to give me something to do and to give people stuck at home something to listen to.
Yeah.
That's I don't ever want to have to do that again. It was fun but I'd much rather be out doing it
Yes.
like I'm doing it.
Yeah, you like to mingle and
oh yeah, I do.
get to know the people.
So
I did try to cheat a little on his trivia because he had his videos up after COVID was.
Yeah, the videos were still on
They
Facebook.
were still on
I was
Facebook.
using the questions that I would make up for down here. When I first went back out live, there wasn't a lot of people that played online that would come live.
Yeah.
So I was like recycling them questions. So he would go back.
I would try to go back and watch his videos.
He was never really good at
it. No, I know, because we never win.
He could cheat as much as he wants, and he's probably still not going to win.
Well, you have that advantage with your third set of questions where you have a theme.
Yeah.
So that actually makes it easier for you, I guess, because you can Google that one topic and come up with
Yes.
The
theme or if I do a full-fledged theme night somewhere, it is easier because all you're looking for is questions based on that theme. Where when I do my general trivia, you know, I try and put a little bit of everything in. I don't want it to be one-sided geography. So it's harder to find the questions because, oh, I already got 3 history questions. And I
Yes.
got to look for this. You know,
Yeah.
it actually makes it more difficult than a theme night. But yeah, well, that picture round, it is a little easier to just print that out. It also gives me the chance to run to the restroom or just take a break for a little bit.
Sure.
So there's all, you know, many
Yes.
different reasons you do that
Okay.
picture round. But uh,
Great.
well, anyway, I guess we'll wrap it up there for this week, and good luck to you on your trip.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Thanks for having me.
as
Good
we
meeting
tell
you.
every guest, when you come back, and if you want to come on and continue, or you have more stories or information, any guest is welcome on here as many times as you want to be on.
Okay,
As long
excellent.
as I mean, I am very surprised at how many guests have been on here.
Yeah.
And we have a little bit of people asking, but our line is not long at this point.
Yes,
So
sure.
you know, any repeats out there, by all
Yeah.
means. Now
Okay.
and also quick mention, not that anybody probably really cares, but we're going to be not here next week,
Right.
and then we'll pick up the following week
Yeah.
again.
Okay.
So
Just to
Great.
follow up with him.
Go ahead.
Just real quick. Where can they find your book? And then once again, your addresses and ways to contact you
Yeah.
that they want.
Well, hopefully you'll put it on your,
Oh, yeah,
your
yeah,
post
yeah.
on the
Yeah.
site. But
Yeah.
again, the website is www.froma2d.org, not .com. I'm at David from A to D on most of the other social media places. The books are called From Ashes to Destiny. You can find them in paperback like this and as a Kindle ebook on Amazon.
Mhm.
They're both available that way, both the one for drug and alcohol addiction and the one for sexual addictions.
All right.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yes,
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. We're going to
Super.
wrap it
Thank
up
you,
there.
guys.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming. And we are done.